A new Arctic Monkeys album is on the horizon, and safe to say, I'm pretty hyped for this new addition to Arctic Monkeys' eclectic and legendary discography. But with their latest release being possibly their most divisive album to date, has my opinion of Tranquility-based Hotel and Casino changed since it was released? Let's discuss. With a humongous 5-year wait between 2013's AM and 2018's Tranquility-based Hotel and Casino, Arctic Monkeys fans, me included, simply could not wait for AM's follow-up, given the success and popularity that album had. AM was seen by many fans as a return to form for the band, and I thought that this album breathed new life into a band that struggled, I think, to cultivate the same excitement and intrigue that their first few albums did. The sound of AM, in my opinion, was so refreshing. The use of drum machines, drum samples, and Chad Blake's interesting mixing techniques broke new ground for the band sonically. Now, most of us would have expected the follow-up to AM to just be a natural progression for the band sonically. Maybe stick with the same kind of core elements but try and refine or tweak some of the sounds for the next album, given that this was such a winning formula. If I was to give an analogy, if you're cooking a steak, stick with the same cut, cook it in the same way but maybe tweak the seasoning a little bit. But no, the release of Tranquility-based Hotel and Casino was a massive shock for many Arctic Monkeys fans. The fan base was completely split. Some were just completely alienated by the new sound, and others, like me, were a bit more open-minded but struggling to make sense of this change in direction to a lounge jazz sound. Well, it's now been 4 years since the release of Tranquility-based Hotel and Casino. Has that change in direction and that new sound aged well, like a fine wine? Or has it aged badly, like milk left out of the fridge for too long? Well, my opinion on this album has changed quite drastically over the past few years. Let's break this down, shall we? Now, the band's sound on this album was definitely a massive departure from anything that they'd done prior. I'm a huge Arctic Monkeys fan, like huge. And I remember quite clearly I was waiting up until midnight for the album to be released on Spotify the day of its release. And as soon as it hit 12, I just remember I had my Sony M3s on, noise cancelling activated, chamomile tea in hand, pyjamas on, here we go. But when those first few seconds of Star Treatment started, it just caught me completely off guard. I genuinely did a bit of a double take on my phone because I didn't believe that I'd clicked on the right album. I thought I'd clicked on the wrong artist because there was no way this sounded like Arctic Monkeys. I've just heard a filtered jazz piano turnaround, for God's sake. But it was Arctic Monkeys. I think I listened to about half the album roughly, I think from Start Treatment all the way until 4 out of 5, before I then pressed pause to kind of process what I'd just heard. I remember thinking that there were some elements that I liked and some sounds that I enjoyed from those tunes, but it didn't really grip me at the first listen. It felt as though there was kind of too much going on for me to digest in one go, and I'd have to kind of revisit those songs a few more times to start to piece together what was going on. But by far the strangest thing for me to process at that time was how this new album was a continuation from AM. I just couldn't link the two at all. Having said that, a lot can change in 5 years. But the more I listened, the more I began to understand. In this album, Alex Turner explores themes of ego, fame, success, and excess. Everyone kind of speaks about that first line of Start Treatment, I just wanted to be one of the Strokes, which is such a profound way to introduce the album. And I guess when Alex and the band look back on what they've achieved, it's kind of surreal and I guess beyond anything that they ever dreamt possible at the time. The AM campaign basically saw the band conquer America, and when you take a hiatus after something like that, you're inevitably going to reflect and look back on what the hell just happened at that time in your career. I mean, you've got 4 teenagers here from Sheffield that will now go down as history as forming one of the best bands this country has ever produced. But the line in this tune that really turned my head was the line that goes, I found out the hard way that this ain't no place for dolls like you and me. What I read into that line in particular was the fact that Alex Turner refers to himself as a doll. And I wonder if maybe he has a feeling of, I've achieved everything I possibly can as a global touring rock musician. I've got all of the accolades, everything you could ever want from this industry. And look how insignificant it all is. Look at how little it all means. It's almost as if he's mocking his past self in a way. He's laughing at the band's former image and status. And he's almost looking at the AM era that's just gone by in his rearview mirror and he's kind of saying, thanks, but no thanks. I feel like having spent time with this album now for a few years, I can understand how the start of this album picks up where AM left off. The instrumental on this opening tune, Star Treatment, is essentially lounge jazz, and the vibe of this whole song makes me feel reflective and somewhat introspective. It's almost as if AM was the party album, it was the night of the event, the night of the party. And Star Treatment begins the morning after the party, where you start to reflect on what you did that night. And maybe you think differently or even regret some of the things that you did at the party. And when you think about it that way, I think it kind of works. It kind of makes sense. To their merit though, I really liked the way they approached this album. Arctic Monkeys have been around for a while. Maybe not as long as, say, the Foo Fighters. But you'd consider Arctic Monkeys to be old hats when it comes to being a top-notch indie rock band. They've kind of been there, done it, got the t-shirt. And they've done it better than anybody else, quite frankly. But what I really like about Arctic Monkeys is that when there's a change in direction, there's a new concept, a new sonic landscape, new personas, and even new outfits, especially if you're Alex. They fully commit to whatever that new direction is. They don't just dip their toe in, they jump in head first. And so, whether you love it or hate it, you kind of have to commend the Arctic Monkeys for the approach that they've taken with each album. You have to commend the fact that they've just gone for it. Now, to put this in perspective, let's take the Foo Fighters, for example. Now, I love the Foos, they're one of my favourite bands of all time, as they are to many. But take their latest album, Medicine at Midnight. This album for me just does not fulfil the brief that the band publicly stated that they were going for, nor the hype that the band created around this new sound. I mean, sure, there are some interesting Bee Gee-like drum grooves in there, but it's in no way a departure, and it's barely even a new sound. It still sounds like classic Foo Fighters to me, and that's a bit of a problem for me personally after 20 years of similar sounding albums back to back. This album sounds to me like a halfway house between their classic sound and trying something new. It's not really fully committed to that new sound like Tranquility based Hotel and Casino is. And that's one of the many reasons I have so much respect for Arctic Monkeys and with their efforts on Tranquility Base, Hotel and Casino. Even the way Alex sings on this album is a complete departure from how he sang on AM. When have you ever heard such a drastic change in singing styles between albums? He goes from a sleek and sultry Americanized way of singing on AM to an intimate, spoken word dramatised croon on Tranquility Base Hotel and Casino. Let's all have a swig into our heartland. Even the way Alex's vocals have been produced on here are night and day different to the ultra-processed, ultra-edited pop vocals that you hear on AM. Not only has James Ford left Alex's breaths in on purpose, but he's also left in the technical imperfections that you hear in Alex's voice from the tape in here as well. And for me, that makes for a much more intimate and authentic listen, which works perfectly with the introspective vibe of the whole album. The way he sings "Dolls Like You and Me," it almost sounds like he's laughing under his breath. And a lot of Alex's vocal delivery on this album has this kind of subtle, sarcastic undertone weaved beneath it, which fits this kind of cynical, retrospective theme so well. But when you get past the halfway point on this album, that's where my opinion of what this album actually symbolises and means has changed somewhat. After being completely mind-blown by the absolute masterpiece that is 4 out of 5, I would have expected the album to deliver more of the same in the second half of the album. Just reflecting on that song itself, those euphoric vocal harmonies that kind of just keep building and building and stacking as the song moves towards its kind of climactic outro, deliver such a memorable moment at this point in the album. Not to mention the great Wurlitzer 12-string acoustic and electric guitar work that kind of all fit together in layers a bit like a jigsaw. It's just a masterful piece of work in my opinion, and one of the band's best songs ever. But the second half of the album just doesn't really deliver on that promise. There aren't really any points after that tune that are really memorable or stand out to me. And it's almost as if the band wrote only the songs that appear on the album for the album. They didn't write like 20 songs and then choose the best 11 or 12 like most bands do when they enter the writing process. It kind of seems like Alex had a concept in his mind, a story that he wanted to tell, and a sequence, an order in which he wanted to tell it. And so these songs had to be the songs on the album, and this was the order that they had to be in. And again, this is just pure speculation, but maybe this was a constraint that the band chose to work within. And the result for me is an incredibly intriguing and interesting listen for Arctic Monkeys fans in parts. But as a listen in its entirety from start to finish, the album just doesn't reward the listener in the way that you'd hope, with those hooky choruses, catchy guitar lines that you'd sing in the shower. I mean, every song has interesting moments, whether it be the kind of haunting bat phone instrumental or Nick's kind of interesting baritone.
She looks like fun.
But is every song on the album a great song? I'm not so sure. And it kind of got me thinking. Given that the band was so involved this time in creating and moulding these new and intriguing sounds and layers, using a lot of instruments that they'd never used and recorded with before, could less time and thought have been given to song structure, creating tight melodies and chorusy choruses? In other words, did the band get a little bit distracted by what actually makes a good song because they were spending so much time with kind of soundscapes and layering? Or were these unusual and unconventional song structures a deliberate choice? Maybe, maybe not. So I guess in conclusion, I'd give this album a solid 4 out of 5. Come on, I couldn't not do it, could I? And I think I found a good way of summarising what this album is. If I was to describe this album now, I'd say that rather than a new destination, what Tranquility Base Hotel and Casino is a bridge or a stop-off between where Arctic Monkeys were with AM and their new sonic destination. Now, I'm in no way saying that this album is half-baked, but it is the first time that we've heard the Arctic Monkeys dabble with vibraphones, Wurlitzers, jazz pianos and strange vintage synthesizers. AM is without a doubt the band's most accomplished piece of work to date, and you can kind of hear everything that the band has learnt with production, soundscaping, with the work they've done with Josh Homme on Humbug, James Ford on the other Arctic Monkeys albums, displayed on AM. But it looks as though Tranquility Base Hotel and Casino is almost like another Humbug for the Arctic Monkeys. It looks as though they're undergoing another phase of experimentation and learning, and the combination of the band's varied influences comes through more than ever on Tranquility Base. And this poses a question for me. Will we see the band continue on this experimentation journey on the next album? Or will they consolidate their learnings from the Tranquility Base sessions to create something a bit more conventional for AM7? Well, in next week's video, I'm going to be talking through exactly what I think this new album is going to sound like. And for those Arctic Monkeys fans that have been living under a rock for the past few weeks, yes, a new album is pretty imminent. And I'll put a link to the video that I made about that up here somewhere so you can see why we know that this album is coming. So if you haven't done already, please subscribe to the channel, button's just down there, so you don't miss any more Arctic Monkeys content. And don't forget to give this video a like if you enjoyed it. Hopefully it was thought-provoking and interesting for you. Stay tuned for next week's video, in which I'm going to talk about what to expect for this new album. And with that, I'll see you next week.